Yeah. So what we had done in the last class was that we had done the verse number 21st, only the meaning of the verse. We'll do it again. So, virtually, what Acharya and Bhagavan, and which is being interpreted by Bhagavan Shankaracharya and by Madhusudana Saraswati, what they're trying to do is kind of summarize the message of Vedanta in this chapter through a very rich dialogue between the student and the teacher, Bhagavan Krishna and Arjuna. And Bhagavan is saying that I'm kind of telling you the whole 13 chapters that we have so far. We have discussed different aspects of what is karma, is karta, what is the bandha karana, why is he in bondage, and how can he get liberation, whether he should take sannyasa. And to be able to adequately address these issues, one needs to know who he is or she is. And then Bhagavan explains that in order to have an appropriate understanding of it, you need to understand what is Kshetra and what is Kshetragya. What is para prakriti and apara prakriti. Kshetragya is the subjective aspect of it, and the material aspect of it is essentially prakriti. So one is the apara prakriti, and the purusha is the para prakriti, if we go by what we have discussed in chapter 7. And later on, Bhagavan in this chapter refers to that as Kshetra and Kshetragya in that particular chapter when he was in the first few verses. And now he's referring to the same thing as Purusha and Prakriti. And these are kind of words which can be used interchangeably. And he'll surprise us further in chapter 15, where he would say that there are two Purushas. One is the Jadavarga, this whole material thing, and the other one is this Chetana aspect, the subjective aspect. And then he'll say that there is a Parapurusha beyond these, which is Paramatma. So there are chances that a lot of people feel that whether a lot of people have sort of contributed certain verses to this Bhagavad Gita, and this text may have developed over a long period of time. Some powerful verses have kind of found their way into the text. That's one interpretation. So it appears as if different philosophical streams have a reflection in this text. That is one way to look at it. But then the coherence of the whole text has been nicely put forth and explained by Bhagavad Pada for our benefit because of his kindness. He has made things very easy for us to deal with. So, what did he say? That if you want to understand why you have a body, what kind of behavior this body has, how do you look, what kind of tendencies it has, you have to understand this thing called Prakriti is its main cause. And this Prakriti, starting with the Prakriti, then is Buddhi, the Mahatattva, and Ahankara, and the Panchatanmatras, Prakriti, Vikriti, 7, and then Gyanendriyas 5, Karmendriyas 5, 10, Manas 11. Then you have Pancha Mahabhuta, the 17 together, right? So this is how we have had a long, that is Linga Sarira. So we have had a long discussion about all this. Now, in the last couple of verses, he mentions that if you have a material frame, we may have a perfect body, but we draw the subjectivity of that particular system. If it's in coma, it may be a very powerful person, it may be a very beautiful girl, it may be a very intelligent person, it may be a great sports person like Michael Schumacher, who's been there in the state of coma for now several months, over more than 1 or 2 years or so. So what happens? You're as good as dead. Nobody's going to touch you. It doesn't make any sense to anyone as to what you're doing. So the system becomes operational because there is somebody to experience making use of these tools, these systems which are available. It's like you may have a supercomputer, but if you don't have someone to handle it, somebody to figure out what's going on, the computer cannot operate itself. Then there should be somebody who sort of puts it on and then takes note of what's going on. And that is the Purusha, the Para Prakriti, the Chetana thing. And that explains why we describe ourselves as we are happy, we are sad, we are excited, we are angry, because that particular thing, that subjectivity, is again because of our ignorance, is having different identifications, and that's how we experience life. This samsara, This whole world, this whole universe that we experience can be traced back to that Paraprakriti that Bhagavan talks about. And most specifically, he mentioned that this whole samsara can be understood by referring to just one word. And what is that? The desire to experience, in a way, the craving, that Purva Sanskara. And why this word Purusha is being used here is to explain that even though we may have all same human bodies, more or less similar organs, minor differences here and there, but all have human systems. But somebody is very spiritually oriented, the other person may be very emotional, another very, very, revengeful and angry. Fourth one is completely detached, or is a philosopher or a poet. We have all these people. Why? Because this Purushatva, that subjectivity that we have, is essentially an outcome of our past karmas, not in this birth, but in several previous births. And this birth, we are born with a certain encashment of the loaded good and bad karma. So we have huge debit and credit accounts. The credit account, lot of good karmas. Debit account, lot of bad karmas. Out of this, the supercomputer called God kind of makes a quick assessment, says this birth you're going to be like this. What logic he applies, we don't know, or what logic she applies, we don't know. But this is that particular logic which is applied, and we are born with a certain program fitted into our system that is called prarabdha karma. And the load which remains is sanchita karma. And why am I mentioning it? Because today these two things are going to come in our discussion in the next verse. And the third category is the kriyamana ragami karma, which we are doing during this life. So one program has been fed into our system, and then we are like a robot having been fed with a certain program. And therefore, what is happening right now is that we are kind of living a life. We are programmed robots, but we have some free will. And using that program, we are trying to do and achieve a lot of things. And that is our Kriyamana Karma for future, which will again fructify in the coming life, not in this life. Okay, so the karya karana kartute hetu prakriti ruchyate purusha sukha dukhanam bhoktritve hetu ruchyate. That much we have understood. And end of the day, he mentioned in the end of it that kahpuna ayam sansaro nama sukha dukha sambhoga sansara. This experience of good, bad, this, that, purusha sukha dukhanam sambhoktritvam sansaritvam. This whole experience itself is what is causing sansaranam, birth and death. We're kind of swimming through this whole ocean of sansara. And then he has to explain how does this Purusha, he's saying that bhoktritve heturuchyate, why you are experiencing sadness and happiness, that paraprakriti, that subjectivity is responsible. If we are all dull, somebody gives us as an injection to sort of artificially control our consciousness. Even if we are not happy, we feel normal. And that's what happens to a lot of addicts, isn't it? They don't know what's going on in their lives because that subjectivity is not able to analyze and make sense of what's going on. That can happen to a person who is in neurosis or who can be kind of sedated or anything. Now, therefore, how does that happen is explained in verse number 21, which we have already done. And what was it? Is a Purusha Prakritisto hi bhunkte. That Purusha, having identification with this Prakriti, the system, that sort of enjoys on its own without a Stula Sarira, without this. If you just think about a subjectivity on its own, it cannot do it. Like, for example, you have fire, but you always need that support, right? That Parthiva, Teja, that is Teja, and Guna is different, but it sort of connects with something physical, material, and then you have fire. And so that is how it is. Bhunkte prakriti jan guna, the sukha dukha gunas, and which are born out of prakriti, are past sanskaras and the sattva, tama, and rajas, and whatever we do, and these are kind of materializing out of the karmas we do, and we have had a long discussion on it. Karanam guno sangasya, and why do we experience this? The cause is that association with the sukha dukkhas and the gunas, sattvas, rajas, and tamas. Sad, asad, yoni, janmashu. And that explains why we are kind of born in a good social station or a bad social station, a good or a bad or adverse condition in which we suddenly find ourselves. We are trying to make our way through these challenges. That is how he says that this is the guna sanga, is the cause which explains what's going to happen to us in future. Now, this is not to feel fatalistic. This is not to feel that it's end of the day is just an issue of bad luck or good luck. No, we have already discussed this, that there is nothing called good or bad luck. Essentially, that luck thing is a sum total of our past, or whatever that encast past activities and predilections and affinities, whatever, that has materialized into a showering of results, which we call luck, bad or good. But the karma is somewhere in a very hidden manner, not easy to notice so far we are concerned, but it's there, and we have to take note of it. Shastra clearly mentions it. Okay, so that is our saying, and then that prakrutita means that avidya guneshu sasangaha kamaha. That is the guna sanga, that desire. Sansarasya karanamiti. Tacha parivarjanaya uchyate. Why is he mentioning this? That the sansaranam is is responsible for all your pain, and how the sansara is possible is because of your desire to experience more of happiness, that you actually get more bound up with a lot of responsibilities. Asyacha nibriti karanam jnana vairagye sang sannyase Gita Shastra prasiddham. So that is towards the end of this 21st verse. He said that all this is mentioned by Bhagavan to sort of encourage Arjuna to recognize. Today you're feeling philosophically confused and a little depressed. Don't forget that you wanted your kingdom back. You are feeling very troubled and harassed by your cousin brothers, and it's part of your prarabdha, but it's also part of what you have been aspiring for. You are a bright person, and you are indomitable. You can defeat anyone. So you wanted to fight, and you came. Then you got frightened because you were afraid whether you're going to lose. People are going to make fun of you. But then we have had a resolution of those issues, and he has already has Vishwarupa Darshana. So therefore, he's in Tacha Jnanam Purastad Upanyastam Khetra Khetragya Visham. That's how Bhagavan. What is that Nibriti thing? How it starts? Therefore, he's saying, yeah, it starts when you have Vairagya and you study the Upanishads, open your inner eye, you don't get stuck with the outside manifestations. And then, who is that Purusha? He is saying that the same Purusha takes different names, right? So it's like in a house, there's a man, he's also a son, he's also a grandfather, he's also a great grandfather, maybe he's a brother, he's an uncle. He plays different kinds of roles. What does it mean? That depending on what context in which we are trying to describe what we are planning to do, and we are twisting our subjectivity and we're behaving as a certain, as a center for certain role play, and that's how we also assume names. So at home, you're a husband or a brother or a sister or a daughter. Outside, you are a citizen, maybe in a cultural group. You belong to that cultural community. That's how different names and forms. Same way, this Purusha, this Chaitanya thing, which is an us, because we are Vedantis, we are talking about what is that Atma Tattva, knowing which will get liberation. And therefore, he's saying that Purusha, that Pratyagatma, that Atma which is in all of us, and I'm referring to that as a Purusha who becomes that Chaitanya thing, the Para Prakriti, is referred to as in many ways. Remember, he started with describing Purusha more or less as Paraprakriti, and now he's, because what is Paraprakriti also at a very vyasti level, at a differentiated individual level, that is called Paraprakriti. The same thing when you drop or take off the cloaks or the garbs or the codes and pleasures that Purusha is wearing at an individual level, what it will become? It will become Paramatma, because it's Suddha Satta Swarupa. For us, everything is Chaitanya. Samsara is Chaitanya, cat, dog, animal, everything is Chaitanya. Where there is a better reflection, we call it Prani. Less reflection, plants. Very less, we call it Jada. Like, stones and rivers and whatever. So, how much the Chaitanya is explicit depends a lot on how clean it is to reflect that Paramatma thing that we will discuss later on. And therefore, he's saying Tasya eva punah sakshat nirdesah kriyate. He directly mentions about that Purusha in this verse number 22nd, which we had done the basic meaning and we will do elaboration today. Upadrastanumantacha bharta bhokta maheshwaraha paramatmiti chapyukta dehesmin purusha paraha. So in this body, that Purusha ultimately is also paraha. So it's the ultimate thing. Oh, it makes it amply clear that the same Suddha Chaitanya, which is Paramatma, again the Jiva Brahma Aikya is indicated in this verse, depending on how you are trying to see that consciousness, you will ascribe a certain name to it. It could be a girl, a good person, bad person, boy, old lady, old person, rich man, intelligent man, stupid man. All these are names and forms, or the panchakosas. These are attributions. Why is it happening? Because of our desire to understand it in a certain way. And why we desire to understand it in a certain way? Because of our own level of understanding or ignorance. Any level of understanding compared to the next higher level is a level of ignorance. And the same level of ignorance compared to the previous level of ignorance is understanding or wisdom. So we are wise, and this wisdom is ignorance vis-a-vis a higher state which we may achieve tomorrow. And this wisdom, what we call ignorance, once we reach there, we'll call it ignorance. This ignorance today we think is wisdom vis-a-vis our previous wisdom, which now we know was at fault. I mean, that was some kind of ignorance. This evolution goes on, it will go on endlessly until we have total Atma Darshana, which will give us a kind of escape from this bondage, this chain of births and deaths and all kinds of identification, emotional problems, or social problems. These things are going to happen at the phenomenal level as Vyavaharika Stara. At that level, these things will happen. Therefore, this Atma is described with a few adjectives, which we did yesterday, and we'll do it in elaboration in an elaborate way today. Upadrasta Anumanta. So there are different words, and Bhagavan Bhashakar will elaborate on these. Upadrashta is what? Somebody who is observing. Because we know the Chaitanya is neither Karta nor Bhokta. But we are ascribing Bhaktri to it. And this Bhaktitva happens because of this Guna Sangha and this identification, because of his relationship with Prakriti. This relationship with Prakriti is again not a real relationship, but an imagined relationship. Okay, this is all imagined. Much of what we say is real is imagined. Upadrashta Anumanta cha Bharta Bhokta Maheshwara. Anumanta is what? Who is kind of thinking about it, reflecting on it, and approving it. So Upadrashta would be somebody who's like a kind of an invigilator who is standing inside the exam hall and he's watching the boys and girls writing their answers. He knows some of them are struggling. He also knows a couple of them are very intelligent. He also knows that some of them are maybe copying from some notes they're carrying and they're going to the bathroom again and again and coming back. He knows all that. But he's also Anumanta. He watches, but he doesn't stop them from doing anything they want. Sometimes they're talking to each other. He says there are only half an hour left, 2.5 hours have gone. So he's very compassionate, quiet, and he's doing his duty. He's watching. Don't shout, he doesn't say. He doesn't say what. That is Anumanta. It appears he has approved of whatever is happening. If something goes wrong, the principal is going to, he's going to, call him and ask, "Well, what went wrong? Why there's so much of noise in the classroom?" But here, he is kind of standing quiet, and he appears to be approving of it because he's not interfering. Okay, that is the next thing on the manta and a bharata. The exam is going on. Why? Because he's there. Without him, well, this examination will not be accepted as an examination hall. Somebody has to certify. His presence is the best certification of the fact that this is an exam going on because he's the invigilator. He's in charge of this examination. Actually, he's not really in charge. He's just quietly standing there. He's not doing anything. He's a senior professor. There are juniors to do these things. He's just quietly The principal walks through different rooms where people are writing their answers. He's like the principal. So he's a Bharta. And a Bhokta. And at the end of the day, when the students have some, they are giving answer sheets, they are saying, Thank you, sir, this is my answer sheet. And on his behalf, all these answer sheets are received by the assistant invigilators. And the chief one in a big hall is quietly standing. So he's receiving the answer sheets. Actually, he's not receiving it physically. There are assistant teachers who are doing it. So he becomes bhokta. He's doing bhoga. He's enjoying, he's experiencing this whole thing. Think about it. And then Maheshwara is the boss. He's also going to decide where these answer sheets will be checked and examination. It's an internal exam, so results will be declared by this. And he's not doing anything. Other teachers will give scoring and everything. He's just quietly there, the principal. Maheshwara. Paramatma iti cha api ukta. And that itself, that fellow is also Paramatma. He'll also finally either fail you or pass you. And that will determine your future. So he's Paramatma. This is just an example. As I have told you, that the example doesn't have to have complete equivalence with what we are talking about. That is the drashtantika. There will be some similarity in order for our understanding. And that is what is the purpose of giving an example in our tradition. It's not that the drishtanta will be exactly as per the drashtantika or the particular subject matter of discussion. Dehesmena Purusha Paraha, and that Purusha, that Atma, is the ultimate thing which is inhabiting or hiding, not visible, but exists in all of us. Why? In the absence of that Paraprakriti or that Chaitanya, that particular, Pratyak Chaitanya, we can't exist. Because without, if we can have a body in the mortuary, but it will not be called a human body, it will be called a human corpse. It's a dead body, isn't it? So it will not be called a human being. It's just flesh, blood, everything is there. It's a human body, but it's not a human being. So you require that, and that is what is the Kshatragya. Okay. Now let's make the detailed analysis of it interesting. Upadrashta. Upa means what? Close, like Upanishad. The student goes close to the teacher and listens to what he talks about the sastras. Therefore, this whole Vidya is called Upanishad. So Upadrashta, Samipastaha. So because of Upa, so he's close to it. Close to what? Whatever is happening. Why? Because he's Chira Jagrata. Even in deep sleep, we know that Atma is there. It's not a problem. He doesn't sleep. He or she doesn't sleep. So he sings Samipastaha Sandrashta Swayam Abhyaprutaha Vyapara Hinaha. He's not involved. So he's not actively involved in anything, just quietly watching it. Yatha Ritik Yajamaneshu Yajna Karma Vyapriteshu Tatastaha. So what happens is that in the Yajna Karmas, in our traditional karmas, the sacrificial rites or the rituals, there are different technical terms for different priests. So there's one guy who is an expert in Rig Veda. He'll do the mantra ucharana. He's called Ritvi. And then there is a particular person in Yajur Veda. He will do the karmas like yaga, devatarte, dravya tyaga, and then you have that dravya prakhepanam, that homa, and all these things he will do. He's called the adharyu. And then there is a udgata. Wherever there is a need for doing recitation of the Vedas, he's the udgata. He is a ganakarta, samavedi. And then there is a Brahma. He's an expert in all four Vedas. He's like a superintendent of the whole thing. He doesn't do any ritual. He doesn't do any physical activities. He doesn't look at the rules and regulations. He doesn't chant the mantras or he doesn't sing the hymns. He's quietly watching everything. But he's an expert in the roles played by all these three people, and what the Jajaman is also there. So there are five people. Jajaman is the guy who has done the sankalpa to do the karma. He's also sitting with his wife. And as you know, the wife has to look at the ghee and other thing. Otherwise, the activity doesn't gain the purity. She has to purify with her look because she has half the benefit. Even if she may not do everything, she gets half the dividend of this dharma. So what happens is that This Brahma is kind of an upadrashta because he's watching everything. He has expertise in all the fields, but he's just watching. And under his guidance, this whole Jagya Kriya is, performed. In that sampadana happens. So Ritvik Yajamaneshu, the Yajamana and these all the Hotas and Udgata. Okay, the Hota is there. Hota is that. Hota is the Ritvik. All are Ritviks is Hota, and then there is a Adharyu, and there is this Udgata, and then finally you have this Brahma is sitting at the top of it. अव्यापृत अच्छा यज्ञ कर्म व्यापृतेषु तटस्थः अन्यः and he's separate अव्यापृतो he's not vyaparavan he's sitting quietly yajna vidya kushalah but he's an expert in how to do these rituals but he's not doing this ritvik yajamana vyapara guna doshanam ikshita he's a watching person he's an observer of the good things being performed and the mistakes we committed by the yajamana and all the ritviks which are sitting इक्षिता तद्वत् कार्यकरणव्यापारेषु अव्यापृतः अन्यो विलक्षणः तेषां कार्यकरणानां सव्यापरणां सामीप्येन द्रष्टा उपद्रष्टा so karyakarana you have the indriyas the sarira is the karya and they are doing different kinds of things and this purusha this atma which is inside is kind of watching it but he's not getting involved that shakhi purusha watching everything he doesn't get into anything tesham karyakarananam savyaparanam they have vyapara indriya has vyapara the body has vyapara with the help of the karma indriyas right so he doesn't get involved he's saying athava there is another way to make sense of it deha chakshur mano buddhi atmanah drashtarah so these four deha you have a body so the body you're walking so you can touch and say this is a tree or this is a stone or this is a human being you a lot of the blind people have super sense with regard to touch they can touch and they really or whatever they read it by touching so you can also make sense of what is happening without using your ear or eyes but just by touching or the snakes and animals they have super sharp sense of smell and they can figure out what it is by smelling it right so you have the body includes these indriyas chakshu means all the indriyas one is the body then the chakshu then you have mana and buddhi mind also observes isn't it otherwise how do you see the dreams and the swapna avastha so the karana sarira the mano buddhi is also there is doing vichara what is happening and atma these are all drashtas they all watch they can make sense of what is there in front of them or what is happening tesam bahyo drashta deha okay so who is the person who connects with the external objects the body deha tataha arabhya antaratamacha pratyak samipa atma then we go inwards so you have the karmendriyas or gyanendriyas outside right these are the watchmen of this whole system you go inside you have manas you have buddhi right and finally what you have the sakhi chaitanya because sometimes we have discussed it earlier we say mera buddhi bigad gaya tha who is saying this there has to be somebody who can make sense of my mind wasn't working you're saying this that means somebody remembers that you did something wrong, your mind did not work well, your intellect didn't perform very well, and there, what was that something? That is that witness self, of the Sakshi Chaitanya, and that Purusha is referred to here. And then he's saying that Antaratama, Pratyak Samipa is very close to you. Pratyak, extremely close, is Samipa. Parag means distant. Atma, Drashta, Yataha, Paro, Antaro, Na Asti. Beyond that, is there a superior one who is watching the Sakshi? No, there will be Anavastha dosha. But you say that there is an inner self which is watching, but actually there's somebody else is watching. If you go on like this, and there is a regression. You will never know where to stop. And therefore, you say that it is Swaprakasa, it has the ability, it's Swam Prakasa. It doesn't require another torchlight. Like the lamp doesn't need a torchlight, the sun doesn't need a torchlight, the self doesn't need somebody else to declare that it exists. Okay? And Atma Drashta Yataha Paro Antaro no Asti Drashta Saha Atisaya Samipyena. It's extremely close. That means what? It's a witness which is there all the time, and it is the closest to the self. Samipyana drashtritvat upadrashta syat. Right? And this is giving another example. Jagya upadrashtivat, the way the Brahma who is watching and finding out what's going on, va sarva vishayi karanat, because he's there and he's sort of connecting with everything. Okay, karanat upadrashta. Okay, that is how he sort of brings it to a close. That ritviks are all three, like you have Hota, Udgata, Adharyu. Hota is Rig Veda, Udgata is Sham Veda, Adharyu is Ajur Veda. And you have the Brahma, Athar Veda, but he's an expert in all that. He's watching and he's guiding, but he's not saying anything. That is what is Upadrashta. Then what is Anumanta? He'll explain. Anumanta, I said, is an invigilator who is standing inside the exam hall but doesn't say anything. Things are happening. And it appears that these are happening with his permission. He's saying the same thing. Anumodanam anumananam kurbatsu tat kriyashu paritosha tatkarta anumantacha. Because you see, say for example, the eye wants to look at a beautiful scenery. Does your Atma say, okay, enjoy it? And then suddenly you see a very bad scene, like just imagine that somebody fell down from a bicycle, or a little baby girl who was walking falls down or cries. You don't like to see that. Well, you're seeing it. Does this self say, no, no, you shouldn't? No, you can't see that. I'm going to prevent it. No, it doesn't. So you have all the freedom. Even though boss is there, he doesn't stop you from doing whatever you want. And that is his easy approving. You don't know because you will get the results, bad or good. The supercomputer will calculate everything, but it will never interfere. It's such a cold-blooded, compassionate at the same time boss who watches everything, doesn't say anything. She's all deep inside. It just takes note of whatever is happening. And that's process later on. That is what it's saying. Anumanta, anumodanam, anumananam kurbasu tat kriyasu paritosha tat karta anumantacha. All these deha and indriya, everything they're doing, it just kind of watches and it appears to approve of everything. Okay, it's like the mother. She has three children, or there's a school mistress. She's in charge of a hostel. She's a matron or she's a warden, and she goes to every room and talks to every boy or girl in the evening time and says, "Okay, what course you are doing? How's your health?" And she sort of talks to all of them, identifies with all of them. And there are smaller children, there are bigger children. She talks to everybody, goes back to her room, and then she's back to herself. She doesn't remember whatever was happening. But then she identifies with all of them. Same way the Sakshi, that particular witness thing, that Purusha that we're talking about, is kind of watching everything that is being done by our sense organs, but doesn't interfere. Okay, even though it's the purest, it's quietly watching everything. Atha anumanta karya karana pravrittishu swayam apravritaha. So whatever you're doing, this Purusha is not involved. Api pravrita iva, as if it's enjoying. Tad anukula vibhavyate. It appears like that. Why? As I told you, the invigilator is standing inside that exam hall and children are talking to each other when the exam is going on. It appears as if the teacher has permitted them to talk. No, the teacher hasn't. He's just a quiet person. He's just walking, watching everything without interfering. Tad anukula vibhavyate tena anumanta athava pravratan savyapareshu. So tat sakshi bhutaha kadachidapi na nivarayati iti anumanta. Or we can also say that all these indriyas, all the jnana indriyas, like our eyes, our nose, our hearing ability, and our smell, faculty of being able to smell things, to test things, whatever you want to do with your indriyas, these doors God has given you to connect with external world, and your manas to imagine, have sansaya and vikalpa and sankalpa, whatever. He just watches, and the buddhi just watches quietly, and it never interferes, doesn't do any nivaranam, it doesn't put a roadblock, allows you to do whatever you want. And he therefore anumanta. Why bharta? Bharta bharanam nama देहि इंद्रिय मन बुद्धीनाम सहि संहतानाम चैतन्य आत्म पारार्थेन निमित्त 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 भूतेन चैतन्य भासानाम यत् स्वरूप धारणम तत् चैतन्यात् चैतन्य Atmakritam eva iti bharta atma iti uchyate. No, there is one standard rule in Sankhya, we have done it, if you remember. Sanghatasya pararthatva. This karya karana sanghata, this body. If you cook some food, you make some a very good recipe, a thali you prepare, there must be somebody to eat it. And therefore, this Prakriti is creating the sansara. Why? We are told for bhoga and apavarga of the Purusha. And the Sankhya Purusha is what is this para Prakriti in Vedanta. Is there, it is infinite numbers of Purusha. There is many bodies, there is many Purushas, and they are all there. And this Prakriti, this Maya, creates the sansara for bhoga and apavarga. The Purusha will get trapped in all of these and enjoy, okay, let me have this, let me have that, and then lose interest and say, what am I getting stuck with? I am not this. How did I come here? Why am I trying to connect with these things and withdraws? That is the moksha, isn't it? It has, in the yoga, we have this viveka khyati, the difference between Purusha and Prakriti. Prakriti, the Chaitanya can get trapped in it. And with a lot of dhyana and everything, the load of Purva Sanskaras, they drop off. Like the snake leaves his snake, the skin, it discards its old skin. Similarly, we discard our bad sanskaras and we remove these names and forms superimposed on us by ourselves because of our previous impressions, predilections, whatever you call them. And then we listen to the Vedantic sentences and we have an opening to what our pure self is all about. And we realize that, okay, I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my appearance, I'm neither man nor woman. What am I? I'm not different from Param Brahma. That's what the text says. Let me find out how that sort of becomes a reality for me. And we start meditating on it. And therefore, he's saying, Bharta Bharanam Nama Dehendriya Manabuddhinam Sanghatanam Chaitanya Atma Pararthena. All these Karyakarana Sanghata, this Apara Prakriti, that whole Karyakarana Sanghata is meant for whom? For bhoga and apavarga of the Purusha, which is there inside. That is the fact. Chaitanya is saying that is the pararthatvan. It's for nimitta bhutena. And it's causing everything to happen in that sense. Chaitanya abhasana. And this Chaitanya, having identified with him, is appearing. We say, this is my body, this is my hand, I'm healthy, I'm sad, I'm ill, I'm not so ill. These are identifications. Atma doesn't have a state called health or ill health. It's the physical thing. But we say, I'm not well. Who is not well? The body is not well or you are not well? But the Vedanta says, no, you are not well or unwell. It is the body, it is the mind that is undergoing changes. It's not you. You are not changing at all. And therefore, he's saying that particular Chaitanya Abhasanam, these are appearances of the consciousness, Yat Surupa Dharanam Tat, then you having these appearances, and then all these are supported by this particular pure self, pure consciousness that you are. Tat Chaitanya Atmakritam, because that consciousness is kind of appearing in these names and forms, Evaiti Bharta. So without this Chaitanya being here, neither the Indriyas can do anything, nor would you have any experience. Only if there is a white screen, which you call the film screen, you can see a film. The film screen has no involvement and has no qualities to create any experience of a fight or a game or a song or beautiful natural sceneries, nothing. But there are things projected on it, and you think things are happening and that it is supporting it. In that sense, it is the Bharta or Poshaka. Because without its presence, nothing is going to be real, nothing is going to work. Therefore, it is Bharta. And why is it Bhokta? Because everything is happening for it. And because, if you look at it, it might confuse you, but what is being said is that particular consciousness is identifying and is appearing as external world, and that consciousness is again identifying with these indriyas and panchakosas, and that same thing is kind of appearing as somebody who's experiencing happiness and sadness. And that's why it is bhukta. Bhukta is what? Agni Ushnavat. Agni Ushnavat Nitya Chaitanya Swarupena Buddhehe Sukha Dukha Mohatmakaha Pratyaha Sarva Vishayaha Chaitanya Atmagrasta Iva Jatamana Vibhakta Vibhavyate iti Bhokta Atma Uchyate. So as I told you that invigilator is not involved in anything, he's quietly standing. And children, after the exam is over, their bell rings and they come to the table and keep their no seats, their answer seats, and they leave the room and go away. And this particular invigilator, he has assistants to help him. But it is said that he has received all the answer sheets. He becomes the guy who has received. So that is how he becomes the bhukta. So the way the fire is associated with heat, heat cannot exist without fire. I mean, we always attribute presence of fire in some form or the other when we talk about heat, isn't it? So all these different, like whether you are experiencing happiness, sadness, or emotion, or heat, or cold, or bad taste, or good taste, there are through different identifications that you are actually connecting with these vishayas, whatever is the object of your experience, of your sense. And that is happening at at the interior most part, in the background of all this, is that particular thing, that witness self, and that's why it's called bhokta. That is what broadly it's saying this. Okay, so atma uchyate. And why is it called maheshwaraha? Sarva atmatvad. And unlike these sankhya darshan people, they believe that there are numerous atmas, we just have one. Now, one appears, avivaktam, vivaktam, eva. Vivaktam eva bhasate. It appears as if it's kind of divided from, all of us are separate from each other. We are not. There's just one self. Because of our different bodies, we kind of appear as if that consciousness is kind of split into million human beings, million consciousness. It's just one. And therefore, he's saying Maheshwara Sarvatmatvat, because that is the pure self, that is the heart of all of it, that is the foundation of all of it. Swatantratvacha, and it's independent of all, because it is nirvikara, and there is absolute, like we are hearing this baby is crying, isn't it? And the baby is overcome very strongly by some grievance against the parents or a sibling. The baby is crying. The same baby, after some time, will start playing with that particular sibling, against which is very angry right now and it's crying. It's all tadatmya, it's only identification. There's nothing false or true about this whole thing. And then that pure self is swatantra. It's not dependent on whatever names and forms. It's a Mahan Ishvara, and this Mahansa Ishvara, Mahansa also Ishvara iti Maheshwaraha. And therefore, because he's the Atma of all of us, and therefore is Parameshwaraha. Paramatma. Why is it called Paramatma? Dehadinam Buddhyantanam. So if you start with the body, end of the day you have the buddhi thing ultimately after this prakriti starts, right? Buddhyantanam pratyagatmatvena. And it is at the back of, because of ignorance, we are identifying with different forms and aspects of our system. We call it our manas, our buddhi, our indriyas, and jnanendriyas, karmendriyas, our body, and all that. Okay, so all these are Atma Sabda Vachya. These all are essentially self consciousness. But we are giving different kinds of names. And out of imagination, Pratyagatmatvena Kalpitanam, these are all imagined. Abhidyaya Parama Upadrashtatvad. And it's the witness of all that is happening, Lakshana Atma iti Paramatma. Because it's sort of, see, how that Purusha in ourselves can become Paramatma. It is not that Brahman that is referred to here. He's saying that, look here, if you compare different names and forms with which we identify as ourselves, that this is my mind, this is my emotion, I'm a poet, I'm a singer, I'm eating, I'm sleeping. Just look at it, that I is getting connected with some physical activity and some sense perception, or the physical body, or the emotional self, or the intellectual self, all that. These are all Atma. Sometimes Atma means Mana, sometimes Atma means Sharira, sometimes Atma can mean Buddhi, right? And they are all Atma Sabdavachya. And that particular Purusha that we're talking about is the chief thing. It is the most superior amongst all. So here we are not talking about the Param Brahman in this verse, and so it's called also the Paramatma. Or you can also stretch it. It will not be a problem because in Vedanta, the so-called Purusha is nothing but a reflection of the Parama Purusha, which is Paramatma, because we have unity in our approach, so there's not a problem. So antah Paramatma iti anena sabdena api uktah katitah sruto in the Srutis Upanishad is also said so antah, that antakarna is Paramatma, is Svetasvatara Upanishad. Iti anena sabdena cha uktah. So what is that? Asmin dehe purusha paraha abhyaktat. Compared to the Abhyakta, the Prakriti, this Purusha, which is abiding in all these bodies, is ultimate. Uttamaha Purushaspanyah Paramatma iti udahitaha, which is in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. What happens is that there is a discussion between Janaka and Yajnavalkya here. And Yajnavalkya is giving long chain of statements and a very long dialogue with Janaka regarding Atma. And he says that, look here, when the cell falls into dreams, it sees dreams. But is it involved? When you wake up, are you affected? You are in a beautiful garden and there are lovely flowers all around. And there were some schoolboys and schoolgirls and they were touching your feet and they were thinking you were the king. The dream breaks. Are you the king? Where are the children? It was all your creation. The sansar is also like that. Now, what happens is that all these creations and imaginations in which we are kind of caught up, right? And the particular self, if you talk about it, is experiencing everything, but it is not at all involved. So it goes into deep sleep. Is it any more bothered about the dreams? Then it comes back to the Jagrat Avastha. Then it wakes up, goes to office, takes care of children or maybe parents, different. And then there is a constant thing which is uniformly present in all these three states. And that is what is that particular thing. So there is another verse after this where he's saying, like for example, there is a bird, and that bird sort of is released in the morning. By evening, it comes back to that particular nest to relax. Similarly, all of us do a lot of work. We want to sleep. Why we want to sleep? Because we want to reconnect with our inner self. And we get a lot of ananda because we are going home. We are going back to the self. Yeah, we don't get liberation. We wake up again because of karma load. And why don't we get liberation? Because we have, proximity with the self without knowledge of the self. It's like you wanted to meet a principal for a recommendation letter. You wanted to apply to a foreign university. You went to the university but couldn't recognize the professor. You didn't know where he is. You had dinner. There were several other people. He was there. You had dinner with him, and you felt very good that I went and they were all professors. But when you came back and you said, so what, you couldn't manage to get the recommendation. So it's like that. That in the deep sleep, we have ananda, we have happiness, but we don't have jnana, and therefore no liberation. Okay? And there are different Upanishadic texts in which this is discussed at length. So he's saying, he's saying, Uttaha Purusatvanyaha Paramatma iti Vidahtaha, and that ultimate thing is referred to as Paramatma. Yo Vakhyamanaha Khetragya Chapimam Vidhi. In the beginning of this particular chapter, iti Upanyasto Vakhyaya Upasangritaha cha, and that's how he's sort of concluding it. Now in the next verse, but before we go there, let's look at Madhusudana Saraswati, or we can sort of do them both together because we have only 7 minutes. So I would like to do the next verse and then try to do as much as we can and then look at Madhusudana. Ya evang vitti purusham prakritim cha gunehi saha sarvatha vartamanopi na sabhuyo vijayate. And the guy is now giving the phala of this knowledge, because we have to have some proyojana. Why do you want to study something? It has no relevance in our lives. So Bhagavan, our spiritual text always tell you what is the benefit of knowing something. He tells here that Yaha evam bhakti, the one who understands this particular secret that I just mentioned to you, that there is Purusha, there is Prakriti. Purusha is same as Paraprakriti, and Prakriti is Aparaprakriti or Kshetragya and Kshetra. Right? And then he understands it. Yo Vekti Purusham Prakritim Cha Gunehi Saha. He understands 3 things: Purusha, Prakriti. Earlier he had mentioned Jnana, Jnaya, right? Jnana, Jnaya, that is Jnatavya, Kshetra and Kshetra. Similarly, he is now saying Purusham, Prakritim, Cha, Gunaisa, along with the gunas. That means all these Sattva, Tama, Rajas, and this whole Indriyas, that the play of everything, the multiplicity, and also the Anubhavas, all the experiences of happiness and sadness. How do they fructify? Why we undergo all these experiences? Sarvatha Vartamanopi, and then he is present. Vartamana here means he is engaged in his activities. Either in his Vidvat Sarira, he is already a Jivana Mukta, or he's doing his continuously after this jnana also he continues to do his Varnashram or whatever. Maybe he's in charge of a school, so he runs it. Maybe she's a mother, so he continues to do her duties, or maybe he's a priest, he manages the temple, depending on whatever role is assigned to you. But nasa bhuyo vijayate. Bhuyo here is punascha, avijayate. He's not born again. Now, in a literal sense, we will say that he will not be born here again. But in a philosophical sense, if you don't want to go that route, the religious route, you want to understand philosophically, he doesn't repeat this whole cycle of samsara. Because you see, every day is also like a birth, isn't it? Every episode of life is a life itself. So he will not repeat this whole vicious circle or virtuous circle, whatever it is. There is nothing which is purely vicious or purely virtuous. Every virtuous circle has its flip side. Every bad vicious circle has a silver lining. But he'll not repeat it anymore. He sort of will be able to withdraw himself and become meditative and live in proximity or in pure communion with the inner self. If he don't, but actually it means that he shall not be born again. Ya evam yathukta prakarena vetti, the one who understands correctly the way I explained, Purusha, knows the self. Shakshat aham iti prakritim cha yathoktan avidya lakshyanam gunehi savikareshah nivartitam abhavam apaditam vidya. So what happens is that if that fellow, along with his ignorance, whatever vikaras are happening, right? That I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I want money, I want fame, and all that. So he understands this whole game, why it's happening and what is this prakriti, because of which he's also bhakta, bhokta, he's also karta, and he's also bharta, all these things, his roles that he has assumed, he has made sense of it. So he has removed the avidya because he understands. Vitti, the one who understands, means his ignorance is gone. He's no more craving to have these experiences because he knows, yeah, these things are happening because of this fault in the system. That is called ignorance. The fault is called ignorance or avidya. He's no more super excited. Then he withdraws. He sort of turns inward towards the self. And then what happens? There is a kind of a nibriti happens, right? He withdraws into the self, and then he becomes, then he gets vidya, then he has that self knowledge. Sarvata sarva prakarana vartamana api sa bhuyah punah patiti asmin vidvatsatiri dehantaraya na avijayate na utpadyate dehantaram na grinhati ityarthaha. So when he has this vidvat sarira, that means that he has achieved that jnana satta because he has understood this game. Why am I undergoing all these problems? He's no more asking questions looking at an external factor, but he has understood that this is a whole mechanism which makes me feel in a good or bad way about what is happening, and these tendency to feel good or bad can be ultimately traced to the way this whole system is organized, as explained in Vedanta. Then he sort of loses interest. He has distance, and that sort of becomes the cause of his liberation in the sense he will not be reborn again. Okay. Api sabdat kimu vaktavyam so brutasto na jayate iti abhipraya. Because api sabda means that even if he's not a sannyasi, he may be doing his varnashrama dharma, his social duties or whatever, still he'll not be reborn because he has done tattva darshana. And then there is a whole dialogue between Shankaracharya and the Purvapakya because we have a doubting Thomas who will come up with a lot of questions, and Shankaracharya will refute them and re-establish the original intended truth which these verse is supposed to convey to us in the Vedanta perspective, and that's what he will establish, and that we'll deal with tomorrow. So I'll stop here. We've just touched the 8:30 thing. We have a couple of minutes, but can we do then the okay? Let's do the Madhusudana of the 23rd, because 22nd one has a longer theme. Ya evam uktena prakarena veti, the one who understands me, Purusham, I am Ahamashmi, iti, I am that Atma, I am that Purusha. That means he is now removing these identification with the Viktaras, modifications of avidya, of ignorance, which makes him think that I'm a handsome guy, I'm a beautiful lady, I'm an intelligent man, I'm a rich person, I'm young, I'm old, I'm attractive, I'm not so attractive, all that. So he's removing them. He has now come closer to the self. Sakshat karoti, he witnesses it. Prakritim cha vidyam gunehi swavikarei saha mithya bhuta bhutam atma vidyaya. So all these modifications, because which are illusory, which are imagined because of ignorance, how does it remove them? By knowing the self. But Bhagavan has said, you cannot overcome Maya or Prakriti. If you try to defeat Prakriti, it will defeat you. What is the technique, sir? He says, focus on me. You focus on me. Yoga khyamam vahamyam. I'll take care of what you need to hold on to. And I'll also provide, it's like yoga is giving you what you need, and Shema is sustaining what you have. Anything good, right? So I'll take care of that aspect. You don't you bother about it. You want to fight the agony of life, focus on me. Because that is an illusion. That's a delusional reality. You're unnecessarily trusting yourself. Look at me. It's like some people feel like vomiting, they feel very nauseated when they're sitting in a car and they're sort of driving up a hill or something. And the best advice they say, you look outside, look at the green scenery, take your mind out of it. And that's how the Bhagavan says, you don't try to fight Maya, focus on me. And therefore, he's saying that Mithya Bhuta Atma Vidya, by focusing on Atma and what is the self, we can get rid of all the nonsense which appears as reality to us. Badhitam Vitti, by obstructing such delusions, who knows how? Nibritti. Mama अज्ञान तत्कार्य इति. He says, हाँ, ये तो मेरे गद्दापन के कारण ऐसे मैंने सोचने लगा था. I thought like that because of my ignorance. Now I understand. इति स सर्वथा प्रारब्ध कर्मवशाद इंद्रियवत विविध विधिम अतिक्रम्य सर्वर्तमानोपि भूय न जायते पतिते अस्मिन् विद्वत् शरीरे पुनर्देह ग्रहणम न करोति. So because of his prarabdha karma, let's imagine we had this Vyadha Gita, where a person is a butcher, but he was an Atmagyani. And we have had so many such examples in the Shastras where a person could be in a different station of life, but they are Atmavid. They know the self and they're quiet inside. They're not affected by happiness and sadness. So, because of this prarabdha, because we'll discuss that tomorrow, what is prarabdha in detail. So, he has to undergo certain pain and pleasures in life outwardly. He's not affected by it, but he doesn't come back here because he's sort of established in truth. There's no return for him. And punardeha granam na karoti. Avidyayam vidyaya. It removes ignorance with knowledge, with understanding. This knowledge is not knowledge of a book. This knowledge is consciousness itself, where you are not different from the knowledge, and there is no objective knowledge outside of you. That is what Vedanta says. Nasaitam tat karya sambhavasya. Tat karya asambhavasya. Because once there is wisdom in you, the sansara happens because of ignorance. But you have destroyed ignorance. The sansaranam cannot happen to you. Sansara comes to an end. Bahuda uktatvat tat adhigamaha uttara purvadhayor aslesa vinaso tad vyapadesa. This is Brahma Sutra. We keep discussing that again and again. The Brahma Sutra very clearly mentions that when a person has got Atmajnana, aslesa vinaso. So purva karma, sanchita karma, prarabdha will stay, but all other karmas, they get destroyed. Whatever bank balance, your debt register, your savings register, burnt because of Atmagyana. Because all the karmas will be there when you identify with your system. I am X, Y, Z. I have this, I have done this, I have helped this fellow, I have suffered humiliation with this person. All these identifications are there. Once you know you are not your body, you are not your social self, your pure self, and the guy who humiliated is not different from you, and the guy who loved you is not different from you, then you have neither any indebtedness nor any anger or frustration. You have a peaceful sense of love towards all. And this sense of love is no different from your self awareness for a Vedanti. And therefore, he says, Tad Adhigamaha. And then that particular jnana is aslesa and vinasa. Aslesa means you are not connected with any future papa punya. You're not affected, right? And then vinasa, purva thing. Aslesa vinaso tad vyapadesa. That's what is experienced. Iti nyaya. Api savdad vividham vidhim atikramya vartamanah. So brutasto bhuya na jayate. Iti kimu vaktavyam iti apiprayah. So even because if a vidyut sarira he has, even if he continues to do what he is doing, then also he'll not come. What to talk about a guy who is already a sannyasi or who is already a atmagyani? Once he has understood what is the Atma, Bhagavan is encouraging us to go in that route to recognize what is Atma. He's saying once you have this Tattva Darshana, even if you are still trapped in your Varna Ashrama karmas, whatever your social station is ascribed to, if you continue to live there, even then you're not going to come back. What to talk about if you become Jivana Bhakta? Praising the virtue of self knowledge. The remaining part of the commentary we'll do tomorrow, wind it up, and then we'll travel to the next verse. So I'll stop here and we'll do the Santi Mantras. I'll put an end to the YouTube. If you have any questions, you can ask in the Google Meet.